Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
I believe the term was pre-termination suspension.
Mitchell sent 205 emails from his work account, but only one was work-related.
Harassing in nature, like wildly inappropriate for work. Quite a bit of emails that were very sexual in nature to subordinates, to other employees.
And he spoke to St. Louis on the Air this week about Mitchell and the alleged harassment.
This is one example of others. It speaks to now we don't have zero tolerance when it comes to harassment.
This sort of lackadaisical attitude by some people who should have, rooted people like Mitchell out.
We should note that we did reach out to St. Louis County government with questions about Mitchell and this report that you've just described. And in an email, a spokesman confirmed.
I'm Rod Milam. In recent years, the St. Louis County Jail has been rocked by a series of scandals, inmate deaths, and high-profile resignations. St. Louis On the Air producer Danny Wysentowski sat down with Ryan Krull to discuss his findings. His reporting revealed that the jail has been dealing with another problem, and that problem's name is Aaron Mitchell. Danny started the conversation by asking Ryan about what he found in the pages of an official jail investigation into Mitchell's behavior.
So it showed a pattern of sexual harassment as well as bullying, both in terms of Mitchell's, I guess you could say, interaction with employees, as well as sort of some harassment via email and other kinds of electronic communication like that.
Now, this report itself, where did that come from?
Sure. So it was commissioned, I should say it was authored seemingly by the guy who's in charge of the jail, Scott Anders. His name was at the end of it. It was written in the form of a letter to Mitchell from Anders, essentially laying out why he was being put on, I believe the term was pre-termination suspension. So why he was being fired, in other words. But even though it was sort of ostensibly authored by Anders, you could tell just from the information in it, as well as some sort of Microsoft Word comments on the side, that there had been a number of people involved in collecting this and putting it together, typing it up, investigating it.
Now, Ryan, just to clarify, you referenced some correspondence within this report. That was from Anders to Mitchell. Explain. Do I have that correct?
Okay, yeah. So it began with a salutation to Aaron Mitchell, and then it basically just proceeded to explain, sort of in an expository fashion, here is why you're being put on pre-termination suspension. And then it outlined basically what you might say were like the allegations against him, and then why those things were being alleged, because this individual had said that. And then with the sort of electronic communication, it was because here are the emails where you sexually harassed this person, or where there was an improper use of email here, there, and that kind of thing. It was basically just outlining the case against him.
Right. Now, we should note that we did reach out to St. Louis County government with questions about Mitchell and this report that you've just described, and that is really central to your investigation in the Riverfront Times. And in an email, a spokesman confirmed that Mitchell was fired in February of this year, and that Director Scott Anders initiated that investigation in the first week of that job, when 3 employees approached Anders about Mitchell and their claims of harassment against him. Now, Ryan, Mitchell worked in the jail since 2001. What do we know about his time there, and were there other reports of abuse?
Yeah, there was early in his tenure, there was an allegation that he had brought a male inmate into a female inmate's cell and I don't know, allowed or coerced, I don't know the exact details, but anyway, the male had sex with the female. And then the story goes that the female inmate and then was coerced into having sex with Mitchell. And that was about 20 years ago. And my understanding is he was suspended for that, but was then returned to his job shortly thereafter. And then I talked to other individuals since doing the story. Actually, a woman talked about Mitchell exposing himself to her. I think it was in 2016, and I don't. That's about all I got.
Sure. And as you mentioned, you've spoken with multiple women who've described working with Mitchell and what this was like. But as you just stated, there was these reports early in his tenure in the early 2000s, and yet he sticks around for more than 20 years. What are things like working around with this guy? What have you heard from people who had to be around him?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the bigger picture here is really just not maybe so much Mitchell, but this idea that there was this group of individuals at the jail who were sort of enabling and protecting him. So yeah, in 2016 for certain, and I believe it was in 2019 as well, there were, female COs who I've talked to who said that they did sort of blow the whistle, raise red flags about Mitchell in those, years very soon after he harassed them, but that ultimately nothing came of it.
Wow. Now, Ryan, you're not the only one who's been asking questions about this jail and its problems. Now, in May, Reverend Philip Duvall resigned his position as chairman of the St. Louis County Justice Services Advisory Board. Now, that board was formed in 2019 in response to the controversies at the jail. Duvall is a civil rights activist and longtime watchdog of the jail operations. Now, he resigned in May, protesting the lack of needed reforms, and he spoke to St. Louis on the Air this week about Mitchell and the alleged harassment.
This is one example of others. It speaks to now we don't have zero tolerance when it comes to harassment. It speaks to someone that was preying on their subordinates. It speaks to the lengthy history, and it speaks to a total disrespect of fellow coworkers. Now, here becomes the question. How in the world does that behavior last as long as it does, and nobody in administration was aware of it and didn't do anything about it?
Duvall also said that the case raises concerns for staff members who want to report harassment in the jail, period. And Duvall said he's worried that no one in St. Louis County is really listening.
There is no whistleblower protection in St. Louis County. There is no one that these persons, and it's not all females. Sometimes it's males too, based on the harassment. They have nowhere to turn to. And another department that I look at with the jaundice eye is the personnel department. Surely these behaviors have been reported. You take, for example, Mr. Mitchell. At some point, he had been terminated and then got his job back. Well, then there should have been a record of what forced him out in the first place. And then to hear that he came back and started 10 years more of it speaks to then no accountability, no transparency.
That was Reverend Philip Duvall, former chairman of the St. Louis County Justice Services Advisory Board. Now, I should note that in the St. Louis County statement provided by a spokesperson in response to questions about this story, the spokesperson did claim that Jail Director Scott Anders has instituted some reforms in response to situations like this. The statement claims that steps have been taken to ensure this type of behavior does not happen again. That includes enforcing policies, having supervisors sign no-tolerance policies to demonstrate that they read it, that they read it and understood it, and will enforce it, and that there's new training for officers and additional training for supervisors. Ryan, does that sound like enough to confront this situation?
I really don't have a good answer for that. That is a really good question. I mean, I guess the one thing I can say is that basically everyone I've talked to, folks who are generally speaking, I guess you would say antagonists of the jail administration included, everyone basically has pretty good things to say about Scott Anders, that he's a true believer in reform and is, in many ways, has a tough job ahead because there are so many sort of entrenched interests and folks who might not want to see that reform. But if Anders, I think he's relatively early in his tenure running the jail. I think at least for now, folks who are interested in this sort of thing can probably give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Now, Ryan, I wanted to return to part of your investigation of Mitchell. And as you said, what really stood out is he was able to continue this behavior for many years and seemingly was protected in this behavior, even when it rose to the point of being kind of crazy. And one of the details that you have in this report involves Mitchell's use of email. Now, the investigation mentioned that on one day at work, Mitchell sent 205 emails from his work account, but only one was work-related. What else did you uncover about his work as a jail supervisor?
Yeah, so he had a lot of relationships with individuals. I guess the one thing to clarify on that's what the report said, and that is true. A lot of his emails were, harassing in nature, like wildly inappropriate for work. But a lot of the stuff that was flagged was stuff that was not work-related, was improper use of email by a jail employee on jail time, but was it sexual harassment? So that's just important to lay that out there. But yeah, there was also other sort of infractions via email. So there was improper collecting of information about inmates from individuals who worked for the court system through email. There was a lot of just personal stuff. And then, sort of very, quite a bit of emails that were very sexual in nature to subordinates, to other employees. And that's maybe especially important because, if that's what the email says, it's pretty hard to argue with that record. It's just kind of is what it is.
Now, Ryan, this jail has been the subject of a lot of concern. We're talking about inmate deaths and transparency, and this has been a fairly steady series of incidents for years. And yet during this time, this jail supervisor is spending his time harassing women digitally, through email, physically, groping these women, as they told you. Do we understand how this impacted the operations of the jail? What wasn't he doing while he was busy harassing women?
That's a good question. We can sort of look at some broad trends in the jail, and that, there's been no shortage of issues with the St. Louis County Jail. And I guess maybe to sort of zoom out just a little bit, but I think in a way that still answers your question, before COVID, during COVID, and even now as we're kind of exiting COVID, turnover at the jail, I haven't looked at the recent numbers, but for a while there, it was just extraordinary, where it was really hard for them to keep people. And, that makes administering a correctional facility, or in this case, a detention facility, very, very difficult. So you start to look at kind of what was going on with Mitchell, what was going on with other people, the sort of lackadaisical attitude by some people who should have, rooted people like Mitchell out. You look at all that and you sort of start to see why they may have had such a turnover, why it was so hard to keep people in this job. So I think turnover is probably one of the big reasons why you saw so many problems you did at the St. Louis County Jail. And then you sort of ask, why was there so much turnover? You look at people like Mitchell, and it kind of all starts to add up.
Right. And, lastly, as you mentioned, zooming out, the big picture that this jail is still trying to reform itself, to improve itself, to be transparent. There is an audit that is planned to be released later this month that has been long awaited in St. Louis County. What are you looking for in that audit, and what are the bigger questions about this jail's operations that you're still trying to answer?
Yeah, about that audit, I guess one of the things first of all, I would just be very curious to see what it says. I would also be very curious about the methodology of how they collected information for that audit. I say that in particular because I think it was in September 2020, there was an audit that Jennifer Joyce, who I believe used to have Kim Gardner's current job.
The former circuit attorney of St. Louis City.
Yeah, thank you. She worked on an audit at the behest, I believe, of Sam Page. And in a nutshell, it basically turned up none of this stuff that has since come to light.
Wow.
And I think that had a lot to do with folks on the ground level, CEOs, entry-level positions, not feeling comfortable contributing to that audit to sort of speak truth to the people collecting that information. So I'd be really curious to know, one, what this audit finds, and then two, if they went about collecting that information in a different way than they did. I guess that would have been about 18 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be, like you say, really interesting to see, what this new audit uncovers and if it really gets to these issues that you're finding in this report. Some really concerning things that you're sharing with us. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Hey, Danny, thank you so much for having me.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our production intern is Avery Rogers. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Our podcast proudly supports St. Louis artists by using music from Life Creative Group. Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.